Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 99 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. This week's tip comes to us from special guest, Coach K.
You cannot present like anyone else. Like the stories you have, the experience that shaped who you are, and the temperament that you have to present in the way that you feel the most comfortable with. When you listen to a speaker and they're presenting things just from their head alone, it's just awkward, right? Whenever you can present, when you're presenting a message, it has to resonate with you first. You have to feel it first. If you don't resonate with it, your audience will never resonate with it either. You have to present authentically. I don't focus on the exchange of the information as much as I focus on the exchange of the concept or the idea that I want them to walk away with. Be you. And when people see you being you freely and fully, they're going to hear more than they ever would if you're just trying to be professional.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Coach K. Welcome back. A lot of my guests actually appear on other podcasts. Shocking news, I know. Every show and host has their own perspective, and the conversations are usually unique. I often listen to other shows that my guests have been on, so I can get a little bit more familiar with them and figure out how I want our conversation to go when they join us on 2-Minute Talk Tips. And I did that a few weeks ago for one of my guests. And as I listened to that interview, I realized, wow, I have a very different energy level than that host does. And I really needed to step up my game. And so when the time came for that conversation, I went ahead and I increased my energy level and I changed my attitude a little bit and my perspective, and I went at it. And it went okay. The guest was happy, and after editing the episode, it was solid. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. But the problem was, it wasn't as good as it should have been, and I felt it at the time. And I gotta say, I was a little embarrassed at the end of it, because I knew that I did not do as well as I could have, because I wasn't being myself. I share this story because Evan Kubasek, also known as Coach K, is my guest this week, and fortunately I was myself for this one. Obviously, we talk about speaking on this episode, and we also talk about sales and marketing, two other things I'm really interested in. The focus of our conversation, though, is on temperament and being authentic to who you are. Coach K helps folks understand their temperaments, the core of who they are and how they work best, because being authentic to yourself is key to effective public speaking and core to professional success, and I found critical to producing podcast episodes that you're really proud of. Coach K is a full-time instructor at Indiana State University focused on management, leadership, and startups. He is the proud father of 4 boys and married to the wife of his youth for 15 years. As a certified temperament analyst from the Sarasota Academy of Christian Counseling, he has used the tool for nearly 10 years across 4 continents with hundreds of people in one-on-one sessions. So now, let's meet Coach K. Coach K, welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. I'm thrilled to have you on the show this week.
Thanks for having me.
You've done a lot of teaching and a lot of helping people live more empowered lives, and a lot of that involves being on stage at some point. What's sort of your earliest memory of being on the stage and talking to groups of people?
I'm thinking back, honestly, I remember for some reason what stands out is what year was that? Maybe like first grade, doing like a Thanksgiving play in elementary school. Just remember really thoroughly enjoying it. There never really was a big stage fright or fear for me. I've always really enjoyed people and just conversation in general. So for me, that was just, like a much larger conversation, right? There's more people that I get to interact with in in a speaking environment like that. There's nothing really that stands out like there's no one defining moment, but I think I always looked forward to opportunities like that.
Gotcha. It wasn't like a light shine down at one point and you were like,
No,
this is it.
Yeah, this is it. No, not at all. Not at all. But just, it was always something that it never was anything that I was truly scared of or something that I dreaded in any stretch of the imagination. It was always something, particularly because it was most of the time, as a kid, when you're on a stage or you're doing something like that, you get to be out of the classroom. You don't have to sit at your desk, which anytime you can get out of your desk was always a win.
Absolutely. It's like, is there furniture I can go move someplace?
Yeah, for sure. Can I run that to the principals? Can I run that note down to the office for someone?
The primary, one of the most awesome jobs we could have in grade school was at the end of the day to be one of the kids who had to haul the trash cans down to the incinerator in the basement because it also smelled awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you make your way from, starting as a grade school thespian and getting comfortable with the stage and those early experiences to taking a role involved in teaching sales and marketing at the college level?
It wasn't a career plan at all. It wasn't something that I was actually ever really aspiring to. In high school, my parents were actually both educators. They're both teachers towards the end of their career. They both finished more in special ed. And there'd be times I'd go over and visit them if I get out of school or whatever. And I enjoyed watching them because they were interacting with people, right, on a regular basis. They were speaking with people. But I also saw that they were doing more than just teaching content. They were making a difference in people's lives on a regular basis. And I wanted to do something like that, but also looking at them and looking at our own family and looking, what disposable income we had. I knew, and this is the thing, like teachers don't get paid, enough for what they do. So I actually started to move more towards business because I wanted to be able to provide a lifestyle for my family that was above what I had to some degree. But at the end of the day, I still wanted to be doing something that was more people-oriented and that focused on people. So I thought that was human resources until you learn what human resources really is, in school. And I realized that wasn't going to do it for me. So I was finishing my MBA and everything, and I was still management focused. And while I was doing that, I was realizing that, there's people that are coming back through and teaching these lower level courses that just had an MBA. And, that was really appealing to consider. Like I would actually enjoy that because I do really love business now, but I still love teaching. But I haven't always necessarily loved the high school, junior high, and lower levels. I love working with people that are motivated to get somewhere. And they know they need some next step, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And that's, for me, while it's not always the case, that's what I see in higher ed, is that while there's a lot of students that are there just because that's what you do, it feels like there's more students there that see a connection between what they're currently studying and potentially what their future is than what you may see in lower levels of education.
Sure. Because I suppose even if they're going there because that's just the thing that you do, they're at least making active decisions about what to do while they're there, which courses to take, which majors to take.
Yeah, exactly. And that's changing. I know that's changing a lot for education and globally, that you get more students with more programs, so they do get more choice, or they're bringing different things in. But by and large, I just found I really do enjoy the college level, but I still really love business and just coaching in general, working with people in general.
Awesome. So when you're teaching sales and marketing in an academic context, what does that look like? I mean, I think most of us are used to sales education is either what you learn by shadowing somebody or a seminar a company may send you to. But at the academic level, it's kind of interesting.
So this semester I actually cold called. I plugged my phone in. We have a speaker system that allows me to plug my phone in so you can hear over the phone and I can still talk to the person. So I plugged my phone in and I cold called a business in the middle of a sales class. And, so you've got a couple things going on here. So generationally, students now, they avoid phone conversations like the plague. They really do not want to talk on the phone ever. They're fine with texting. They're fine with emailing. They prefer text. Text is a primary source of communication for them. So they really don't. But that's being able to get on the phone and talk to someone is still a big part of business life. So for me, I think that was one of my biggest takeaways from higher ed was exactly what you're saying. It's like the more hands-on, the more experiential you can be, the better it is. Now, there is still content, there's requirements that I need to hit in order to hit the learning objectives for the course that I may be assigned that semester. And I do that, and there are still lectures and everything, but I try as much as I can to move away from lecture and do much more project-based or getting students interaction or tying content to what their current lives look like, particularly in university settings. While so many of my students have one or two part-time jobs, they're incredibly busy, but nevertheless, the jobs that they have now are not the jobs that they're getting educations for. So they don't have a framework for a lot of the content that we're teaching to some degrees. There's still, all the basics of marketing, we're covering the 4 Ps. We're doing all this stuff that a lot of people still remember. But in sales specifically, the content that we focus on is a very relational driven sales model. So it's not about closing a deal. It's about building a long time, ongoing profitable relationship with customers and teaching them, how do you do that? Prospecting and getting leads and all those tools and methods to do that to some degree. So yeah, it's very much about helping students to realize the people and the relational aspects of business. I stress that a lot.
Interesting. And I imagine things like that live cold call is what those students will be able to most clearly remember from the course 2 years down the road.
That's yeah, absolutely. Well, I call people in too to speak for 10 to 15 minutes. So I've called in multiple people this semester in different classes because I always remember, and I'm sure you might remember too, like you remember the guest speaker, but you remember maybe 5% of what the actual instructor ever said.
Sure.
In that course. But that day that guest speaker showed up, you still remember that story. And I remember that, so I try to leverage that as much as possible. That people, and just generally people remember stories more than bullet point lists.
So why are students generally choosing classes like this?
By and large, you have a lot of them that are still, this is part of my requirement. So they go through that path because this is the path I have to take to earn a marketing degree or a management degree or whatever. But then there's other ones. So I did have management students that chose it as an elective, sales specifically. Now I also do entrepreneurship, and that's a different bag. There's students that pick it because number one, they want to see, is this potentially for me? Like, am I an entrepreneur? Or there's ones that are saying, it just sounds really interesting. And it's still just kind of intriguing, I think, for a lot of people still. So it really depends on the class, whether it's a core class or it's an elective that they can add on. And then sometimes at the end of the day, it's, hey, it fit my schedule. I try to be very transparent, honest, and like, hey, just let me know, like, why I ask, and why are you here? I want to know what you're looking for.
And that's often a key part of sales is understanding what your client is looking for to begin with.
Exactly.
So you mentioned entrepreneurship there, and I think that's really interesting too, because, obviously there seems to be a very big difference in the set of skills that will make you successful in an established corporation or organizational structure versus the set of skills that will enable you to launch a startup and take it to a certain phase of its development.
Yeah, organizational size plays a big role in how you function at work and also culture in general. Right. You can go from, even within the same industry, if you have listeners that go from one company within the industry to another company in the industry, and it feels like they just landed on another planet, because every organization has its own culture. And most of that culture is a subset of the DNA of the founder, of the entrepreneur that launched it. No matter how many years ago it was, whether it's 10 years or 100 years, there's going to be a way that things are done. Because of someone that's there or someone that came on later. There's a lot of times, there's a lot more pomp and circumstance and procedural processes in larger organizations that you have to work through especially to move up. But many times what I still see is that a lot of the people that move into VP or in C-level suite roles, they still have a lot of entrepreneurial traits to them, even if they're not technically entrepreneurs. They're still building a subset within an organization, and to build something or to launch a new office or to launch a new product or get a new division up and running, it's still that same decisiveness that most entrepreneurs exhibit as well.
Yeah, and interesting that decisiveness becomes key, and the higher you move up in an organization, or the more you start doing with your startup. Ultimately, as in that leadership role, you're doing less of the work of implementing something and more just making decisions about what the organization should do.
Absolutely. And to be able to make if you take a subset type of, the classic prototype of an entrepreneur, anything, they don't make mistakes. They eliminate options, right? It's just, it's like, we decided that wasn't the best route. It could be a flaming disaster of a decision, but they don't dwell on it. They move on quickly. And that, so there are temperament traits that lend themselves, and there are types of temperaments that are more likely to act that way than others, for sure. So that it all ties together, kind of knowing what people's strengths are.
Right. Now, I think it's great that you're bringing up temperaments here, because you also work as a personal coach around the idea of helping people understand their temperaments and how that impacts their lives. What do you mean by temperaments in this context?
So it goes back to, it's a theory just like all other theories, right? And there's measurable aspects of it. It's not law. It's not infallible by any stretch of the imagination. But temperament theory goes all the way back to like Plato and Aristotle. And the idea that behavior is measurable, and that there's these prototypes of people, and there's these behavioral drives in people that are measurable and that can stay the same. There's two big principles that I found are really fascinating. Number one, temperament doesn't change. You're born with it, and it's the same temperament from birth to death. And temperament, if you picture more of a triangle, temperament's more the base, and then in the middle is more kind of character and worldview and your experiences in life. And then the tip of that is more personality, like what you really show to the world. So there are people that are not aligned with their temperament drives, or kind of these emotional needs that they're trying to fulfill. And then the people that are. And the more people are aligned with who they really are at their core, the more their personality is aligned with that core. Just generally, happier and healthier and more alive and connected they feel with the things that they do. So there's a lot to be said about finding work, finding friends, finding environments where you can truly have those emotional needs filled fully, and being able to identify what those are, and finding roles. I think there's been a really big shift of the past 10 to 15 years. Most, we throw back at HR for a second. Most training, or most, like when you go in and do assessments of people in sales training, you have this predefined grid of behaviors that a salesperson should show. And then you measure people against those. And if they don't match up, then you give them these performance correction goals that they have to start acting a different way. But most of the time, those grids are either, a type of temperament or some hodgepodge of temperament strengths that not every person is ever going to truly demonstrate. It's kind of like this losing battle where you constantly feel like you're always failing in some area, rather than helping people to see, no, there's these things that you are naturally always going to be good at, and these things that you will probably always be bad at. So let's just not work in those areas where you're naturally always going to be weak, and focus on the areas where you already are strong, and just make those much stronger.
So when you talk about it in the context of sales, to continue that example, somebody who's got a different set of temperaments as opposed to a traditionally what we might think of as a salesperson, can they still be successful in a sales role by approaching it in a way more in line with their temperaments, or are there really just temperaments that will just keep you out of a particular type of career?
So yes, to all of it, right? I think that's my general answer, because I love tensions. Is that I think
the answer I give to almost every question is it depends.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think anyone can be good at sales. I think it really, once again, it does depend on the culture of the organization, the sales management, the way so if the manager truly is willing to work with you and allow you to explore how's the best way for you to sell, then yeah, absolutely. Now, if you have a sales manager who says, this is the way I did it, this is the only way to do sales in this organization, then yeah, there's a really good chance you won't be a good salesperson in that organization underneath that manager, because they only see it as this one path of a way to sell. And so if we go back to the idea that really good sales, no matter what you're doing, should be about facilitating relationship. Well, any temperament, any person can start and establish and maintain relationships. All temperaments can maintain relationships. So if it's about building and maintaining a relationship that then culminates with an exchange of value that's beneficial for both parties, then yes, anyone can do that. But the way that they do it is not going to always fit into the same box for each one of your salespeople. So that takes more time and energy to manage your salespeople differently and to give them the freedom to do that. And then most people don't want to take the time and energy to do that.
And we also have this perception that folks who are not like us, who don't behave in the same way that we are in some way deficient.
Exactly. Or lazy. Or whatever negative trait we want to throw out there. They're not motivated. They're not a team player. Throw whatever negative thing our listeners probably have heard when they've been in the wrong role, right? It's not true of who they are. They just were not fully put into the best position.
So sales is something that everybody's encountered and has perceptions on. So that's why it's one of those things that's always great to talk about.
It's a classic, high energy, right? All those things. And I've met some incredible salespeople that are not that classic prototype of a salesperson. They're not boundless energy. They don't overpromise and underdeliver. They're great listeners, truly insightful, very caring. Right? It's like once again, it depends on the industry, it depends on the organization, it depends on what that manager is rewarding. You get a lot of behavior that's rewarded.
How do temperaments impact the ability of a speaker to speak in front of a group or from the stage?
So there are temperaments that are just naturally going to love the spotlight, period. Right? So there are people that can get out there and draw attention to themselves and just naturally create an environment where people are going to feel engaged and entertained, right? But the reality is not every speaking engagement needs that type of persona, that type of temperament in that setting. Like if you're trying to really make people feel like you are committed, serious, driven, organization, or you're serious about this project, or you're the world's best leader in something, you don't want to put Sam smile a lot or Susie laugh happy out there. Like that doesn't accomplish that goal. So while they may be a naturally gifted entertainer or the ability to garner attention, that doesn't mean they're actually accomplishing the goal for that particular speaking engagement. So there's I'll use this example. It's not a speaking example, but it's just another really fascinating one. Is that I have a friend that's former special forces, and I did a profile with him, and he's like, this is crazy. We did weeks of assessments, and this told me, if not more than that, in such a short amount of time. But the reality is his whole team was just like him. We're all the exact same temperament. Like I described it, and he was like, yeah, all of the guys on my team were just like me. But there was another team, and I was describing some of the other temperament types. There's another team that was much more phlegmatic, much more easygoing, middle of the road, not too stirred up about things. They were all trained with the same skills. They were all trained for the same missions, but that team was all that type of temperament. And he always found it fascinating, like why his team would be deployed in some missions and why that team would be deployed on some missions. They all had the same skills, but they were used at different times for different purposes.
Interesting. So when they were building the teams, did they sort of match people up with these temperaments, or does it just sort of happen that way out of circumstance?
I don't know enough about, but
Sure.
from anything that I've read, I would have to say that nothing happens at that level of the military without a specific objective and goal in mind. I can't imagine they would ever haphazardly put together a team. My assessment is that it was a architected team for a specific purpose as to why they would group people together with specific type of drives.
So once we've identified our temperament, what can we do with that information to become a better speaker or to be better, more effective in our career?
You can learn to say no a lot better and yes, right? You can start to truly identify. And also, when you are presented with an opportunity or a project or speaking engagement for whatever it is, you can better clarify, this is how I work best. And here is what I'm gonna be able to offer you. So there's also realities that most people are a mix of temperaments. I think that's a common error with a lot of tools, is that people think they're this, when most people are blends of different things in different areas, which is really fascinating. Like the instrument that I use has over 3,000 possible combinations across these different areas. So it's a lot, but it's actually very simple when you get down to it. Part of my weaknesses, or part of the temperament one that I have, is my energy level. I can be very intense and very upbeat and go for a while, but I don't have the ability to do that for long periods of time. Another reason why I love higher ed is that I get 12 to 16 weeks with a group of students, and I get to kick them out and get a new batch in. There's these clear defined seasons and cycles that most people don't have that luxury in their roles or in their positions in their jobs. There's like a never ending supply of work, and there are no seasons that come and go. It's just kind of like constantly busy. So that seasonality for me is really important, really great, because I get to know that there's a clearly defined starting point where I can ramp up and I can invest, but I also know there's this finishing point. And then I may pick up the same students again in another semester, but that's a different course. It's a different context and everything. So absolutely, you get to have a better idea of, and also a release to be able to realize, hey, this is not what makes me happy, or this is not what I enjoy, and it's okay. I think so many people read articles about, look at this person, like everyone's trying to be like Elon Musk now currently, or everyone's trying to be like a certain athlete, right? Then they read their schedule of how they do things, and they try to piece together pieces of their life into their life, thinking that that's going to complete them. And surprise, it doesn't, right? Because they're probably a completely different temperament than the person reading that article about that person that they're trying to be like. So just the freedom to say, there's a lot of different takeaways. For melancholies, if someone's a melancholy in certain areas, they have to have quiet time. Like, this is not a negotiable. They have to have time at some point in the day where they can literally sit and space out and think and process and put their ideas in order. Otherwise, they'll just lay in bed and not sleep. There's other people, sanguines, have to have variety. You put them in an office and make them sit there for 8 hours straight, they're going to quit after a while. It just doesn't fit how they're wired. Or you put someone more of a cleric temperament and you don't give them control over a project, watch out. I mean, they're just built to tell people what to do. And that's just how they're wired. They need to have control over situations. So there's absolutely clear takeaways for every temperament type. And now the challenge is, so what does that mean to me and my job and my role? And that's what the joy of coaching brings, is that I get to be able to say, like, tell me about, what you currently do, or tell me about what you want to do. And we can find ways and paths to match those things up. So I'll give one example too, from the teaching perspective, is that I can start to, now you need to have an instrument to be more accurate. identifying someone's temperament. But there's verbal signs. It's amazing things that people say, or the way that they say them, or how they dress, that gives me indicators of their temperament. So I can teach to someone's temperament because it does affect the way that people learn.
So it's an interesting tool, but how does this tool compare to what folks might be familiar with from other areas, whether that's going to be a Myers-Briggs or a DISC profile or something like that?
Yeah, which cupcake am I, or which vegetable am I? Which Power Ranger am I this week? I think there's most personality assessments are that. They're measuring that personality. If we go back to that triangle illustration, right, where personality's at the top and kind of character and your experiences are in the middle, and then temperament's kind of a base, is that they most of the time they do measure more the top. They measure your behaviors, they measure the person, they measure the masks that you show to the world, and they measure them fairly accurately. The problem is a lot of them shift, right? You take that assessment at one point, then you take it in a different job and it says you're something different many times. Is because, your personality can change and adapt to your environment, to the job, to the thing that you're doing, into your life, whereas temperament doesn't. It's a much more stable measurement, and it also explains the why much more than this is what you do. A lot of other assessments don't really give you an explanation for why you feel the way that you do, whereas temperament does. It's just, you feel this way because this is how you're wired. And you will always feel this way. You will always feel a need to be around people, or you will always feel a need to get away from people based upon your temperament type. You will always feel frustrated when people don't give you control over something. So all those temperament takeaways are things that are just there. Now it's just a matter of saying, okay, that's who I am. Now, how do I find ways to leverage that? And just say, like, that's me. This is me. This is who I am. This is how I'm wired. So now I can go out and find opportunities to leverage that well.
Interesting. I think one of the neat things about what's happened in, sort of our broader culture over the last 5 to 10 years or so is a broader acceptance of even things like, at the most basic level, what it means to be an extrovert versus what it means to be an introvert, and how we draw energy and things like that. And it seems like with what you're talking about, that sort of leverages some of that greater acceptance now of maybe those temperaments that need that isolation after a period of time, or that tend towards the introversion. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the other crazy thing, is that you can, most of the time, we treat people the way we see them treating other people, right? So if we see someone that's extroverted, we go up to them and we try to increase our energy level and be extroverted towards them. And then every once in a while we do that and they don't respond. Like, so here's an example. You're at a conference and you see this amazing speaker on the stage, and they were just absolutely dynamic. They wowed the crowd. They seemed alive. They seemed very extroverted. And then you talk to them off the stage and they have no desire to talk to you at all. And you're like, what just happened? I mean, you're totally just kind of like dumbfounded. Like, you seem like this amazing diamond. A lot of entertainers, a lot of actors and musicians are truly more introverted, but they know how to project the right image on a stage. They know how to capture people's attention and do what they need to do to fulfill a role, but that's not really who they are or what they really need for themselves. So there definitely can be gaps for people, and so that's a whole nother takeaway from temperament for sure, is help people identify what those gaps are. But absolutely, there is a greater focus towards strengths, strength finders and all the stuff that comes out of Gallup polls and all the positive psychology that's coming forward is helping people realize that this is who you are. So can you be an introverted salesperson? Absolutely. Introverts do great one-on-one, but they hate the stage. Can you be an extroverted salesperson? Absolutely. They love the stage and they get bored with one-on-one conversations, right? So it's just a matter of figuring out exactly where, so in a sales organization or in a sales team, do you need people to go out and do conference speaking? Absolutely. We'll send your extroverts. Do you need people to do deeper one-on-one technical conversations? Awesome. Send your introverted salespeople. The problem is that we try to make people kind of do it all. We're still in this weird mix of generalist specialists in work, where we tell people to be specialized, but then we still expect them to be generalists.
Right. And I think one of the things that's really interesting for speakers too is that, like I say, a lot of times you see that speaker on stage who's all over the top, and then they're just very quiet and reserved once they're off the stage. Yeah. Speaking to 50 people or 100 or 1,000 is a very different type of energy than engaging with a person one-on-one or two-on-one in that small group.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. They are night and day different.
Yeah. And so I think it's important to think that, just because you think of yourself as an introvert or shy, that you can't get up on stage. That's not the case at all. It's so for so many people, it's so much easier to get up on stage and talk to that full room than it is to walk into a cocktail party and find 2 people to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So those social engagement situations, yeah, for sure. I think there's the people that thrive in, the small room with 10 to 15 people, where it's not really enough for lots of conversations. Generally what you find out is that there's that one person that dominates the entire room, right? And then everyone just kind of listens in on their conversation. Then people kind of gather around and listen. And then you got the wallflowers just kind of sit around. They're like, I can't match that, so I don't say anything, right? But when you are the only voice in the room on the stage, well, you can lead the dynamics of that however you want to, right? You're painting kind of the canvas for people on the stage, so you don't have to lead with this big, loud, booming, dynamic presentation. If it's just you can still gather people's attention with the silence and with the soft-spoken voice and draw people in. You can do that however you want to. It's up to you to choose how you want to do that.
Absolutely. So what can we do if we don't like our temperament? Or is that a question that doesn't even make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. It makes sense. My wife doesn't like the temperament that she has to some degree. And the instrument that we use, we're both trained analysts. So it's part of our dialogue that we have when we're talking with our kids, with other people. And, hers is sanguine, is a classic temperament type, that sunshiny, outgoing, draws attention to themselves, type of person. And the tool that we use actually identified a 5th one, which isn't very common. No other tool does that, which was supine, which has the desire, the drive to be that outgoing type, but isn't. They're the kinds that they're so excited to go to the party or to the event, but on the way to the party or event, they have butterflies in their stomach and they almost feel sick to their stomach, because now there's these nerves of actually going to the event. Going to be invited to the event, being at the event, they can match the energy level. So there absolutely are people. I hate my low energy level. It just is. Like, I can't, like, naps don't do it. Coffee only does so much. At the end of the day, like, I just know, like, I don't have the energy level that I would wish that I had. So I have to find ways. Now, for me, my energy level increases when I'm part of a team. When I'm doing things solo, it definitely drags. But if I'm with a team or other people, I'm able to match pace a lot easier. That's one of the takeaways from my temperament. So absolutely. And that's the thing. Every temperament has weaknesses. Every temperament has things that are not fun. That's just, there's not another shocker. There's not a perfect person on the earth, right? Every one of them has downsides. Now, the biggest takeaway is that when you're actually doing things that match your strengths, those downsides that we keep trying to correct really don't show up as much, which for me was a huge takeaway. When I'm doing something that I love, the negative things that I could be prone to aren't a temptation or a problem for me as much. But when I'm not doing something that I love, those negative things show up a whole lot more.
Interesting. So in those times, yeah, and that could show up as anything from distractions to just other things you do to put off doing what you're supposed to be doing, if what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah.
Yep.
So how can somebody learn more about what their temperament is?
You can look online. There's lots of different books that are out there, and you can do a basic study of it and everything. Obviously you can connect with me, but I'm not the gatekeeper of temperament, right? So there's other ones that are certainly out there. I would just caution people to be wary of ones that once again prescribe you as a temperament, because most people that I've ever tested, and I've hundreds, and this isn't, so once again, this isn't an American cultural thing. I've done temperament types in Asia and Africa and the Middle East, and they're accurate. So this transcends culture, which blew my mind. I didn't believe that it would actually work. I just tried it, and it did. I did it with a group of Nepali engineers in Kathmandu, and they came back, and I had them self-rate, and it was 90% accurate for them self-rating. Like 90% of them said, yes, this is actually who I am. And that's what's amazing, is you have temperaments that are much more outgoing and loud, and attention-seeking, in an Asian culture that is much more reserved and a lot more collective rather than individual, and yet they still have that same emotional driver for sure. So you can reach out to me if you want to really have a truly personalized, like, how do I match and find out who I am and the depth of it, and then what it looks like. But you can just do some general searches on temperament, and you can start to get some ideas of what those classic temperament types are. But don't run out and change your job or quit your job because you read some book and said, I'm fully embracing that I'm this temperament, if you don't have the evidence to prove that you are.
It's a starting point for the work that you need to do.
It's a great starting point. Absolutely.
So when you start testing cross-culturally, do you find that the percentages of particular temperament types apply on a worldwide basis, or are they culturally determined? For example, do you find a higher percentage of supine or sanguine folks in the U.S. than you do in Nepal, for example?
No, I haven't. It's kind of like for me, it's kind of like talent, right? It's equally distributed, but how it shows up in a culture, or how it shows up through opportunities, is going to really depend upon the location. Like, for example, I did a project in Haiti, and so most people think, oh, island time, they're just kind of chill and relax and just kind of do it in their own time. That's a giant, huge cultural projection over an entire group of people, right? Where you have individuals within that culture that are fast-paced, driven, or quiet and reserved and meticulous, right? So while culture is a very powerful thing, and within that culture, you have these individual people with individual emotional drivers and temperament types that are trying to be who they were created to be, through that culture. And some cultures are more aligned with some temperament types than others, but at the end of the day, for me, I've found that it's always kind of just spread all over the world, whatever it is.
And ultimately, you want, the more you understand yourself, the better you can figure out how you want to approach the other things in life, how you want to approach your career in speaking, in working within your organization, or in creating your own startup as you go through life.
And also giving other people the freedom to be who they are too. Like, the people that annoy you to death probably have a complete opposite temperament, and they're trying to meet the needs that they have, but the way they go about doing it, you would never do it that way. And you don't have a framework for it because there's not a bone in your body that thinks or feels that way.
They're not doing it purposely to annoy you.
Exactly. I think this is the world we're in now. It's like, if the rest of the world would just go away and stop messing with my world, it would be much better. And that's just not going to be the case. So that's been a huge takeaway for me as well, is to identify the people that would drive me crazy, that I think are I work with a lot of people that people would consider narcissistic jerks because they make amazing entrepreneurs. And those are the people that I work with a lot in my business coaching consulting practice.
So if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
You can check me out. CoachK.me is the website. You can find me at CoachK.me on Facebook as well. Those are the two primary places. I'm on LinkedIn. Search for the whole name, Evan Kubicek, Kubiceek. But the easiest way is just CoachK.me, and you can find me around that way.
Awesome. And we'll also have those links over at 2minutetalktips.com/Coach K.
Awesome.
So, Coach K, Evan, it has been fantastic. I've learned a bunch of stuff today, and I hope everyone else has too. Thank you so much for joining us this week on 2 Minute Talk Tips.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the great questions.
This is really the advice we've been hearing all of our lives, from parents, from after-school specials, from public service announcements, and from guidance counselors. It's the advice to simply be yourself. Head on over to the show notes at 2minutetalktips.com/Coach K to find more of Coach K's resources and explore how you can find your own temperament. Share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or a relative by giving them the link 2minutetalktips.com/Coach K. And next week, we'll hear from Pat Roque.
What would your best friend, colleague, or your mom say is your best attribute? Why do you rock? And we go through the audience. I typically speak with a wireless lavalier. I'm untethered, and I'm in and around and working the room. I almost never have a PowerPoint unless someone absolutely begs me to have one. And if I do, it's the bare minimum possible, because it's really about you, the people in the seats, and getting you to stop and to pause and to think about why you rock.
Thanks for listening. I'm Bill Monroe, and as always, don't get best, get better.
2 Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.